Hello, here we are in Chapter 3. This is our first video lecture for Intro to Humanities. Please follow along and make sure also to read the chapter in your textbook. So this is being a critic of the arts. So first I want to say congratulations. You are already a critic of the arts. You participate in low-level criticism pretty much on a daily basis. So this is the criticism that's going on in the periphery of our minds when we watch TV or read a book or go to the movies. And it's basically about establishing preferences. So you choose one TV show over the other, you prefer one song over the other, things like that. That's low-level criticism. So you're already being a critic of the arts. Now it's just time to take it to a higher level. But first, let's talk about establishing those preferences. So I have two paintings here. They're pretty famous. The first one here is Nighthawks by Edward Hopper. This is a pretty realistic painting. It's pretty straightforward. It's kind of a night scene on a city street looking in the window of a diner. In contrast, here's Salvador Dali's Swans Reflecting Elephants. So you see in the forefront there are three swans, and their reflection, they're elephants. This is not as straightforward of a painting. It's called surrealism, and it's a little more abstract, has a little more interpretation to do. Some people will like Nighthawks. Some people will like Swans Reflecting Elephants. Some people will like neither. When you decide which one you like better, or if you don't like either of them at all, you're being a low-level critic of the arts. But there's a higher level criticism that we want to get to. Higher level criticism is what accounts for those subtle distinctions. So being able to really pick out some of those things that we talked about in class last week. Think back to our discussion on Guernica and what the bull symbolizes, and picking out all of the different forms and the light and the colors and all of that stuff. These more purposeful and conscious decisions and critiques are that higher level criticism. And higher level criticism is much more in depth, and it requires participation. So if you think back to Chapter 2 and what we talked about last week, participation is becoming one with the experience or losing oneself in the art. Basically, you get so engrossed in the art that you're immersed in it and you're not conscious of yourself or what's going on around you. Your full attention is on the art. And all of that, participation and higher level criticism, requires a lot of patience. Critiquing art should take a long time, but it should be time well spent. It should be time, because of that participation, where you're like, wow, I looked at that painting for 15 minutes, or I watched all of that season of Orange is the New Black because I couldn't stand not to. That's that patience that it takes. So these things are what make up a good art critic, but also think about what else they can do for you. If you are able to participate in something, and if you have patience with something, and you're looking more in depth at something, they really help you become a capable thinker and an observer in all areas of your life, whatever you're doing, not just the arts. So keep that in mind as we go along, because that's the point of this class, is to understand how the arts help you become a better critical thinker. So the rest of this chapter is about three types of criticism. And these types of criticism are going to become very important. You really need to be able to understand these types of criticism and be able to actually do these types of criticism as we move along through all the rest of the chapters in the class, in the semester. So make sure that you're doing that. The first type of criticism we have here is descriptive criticism. So basically descriptive, describing. So your book calls it describing, sometimes exhaustively, the important characteristic of a work's form to improve understanding. So basically that means you want to pull out all of those types of the work's art form. So the colors, the line, the shapes, the perspective in a painting, the stanzas, the rhyming scheme, the meter, that word choices in poetry, the melody, the harmony, the instrumental or vocal differences in a song, things like that. So these are things you have to carefully observe. They shouldn't be the things that are just apparent. You need to be searching for what you're not immediately aware of. So that's where that participation and patience comes in. And being able to achieve some sort of descriptive criticism should help you improve your participation. So if you're looking for more on that, look at page 50 and 51 in your textbook. Once you've looked at page 50 and 51, I want you to take a look at this Lil Wayne song that I'm going to link to you. We don't have time to look at it in this video, so you're going to need to take a look at it on your own. It's just a short, like 4.5-minute song. What I'd really like you to do is listen to the song and describe exactly what's happening. So set the scene. Take a look at the lyrics, take a look at the chorus and the verses, and come to class ready to discuss your findings. So the song is here, Mirror, Lil Wayne. We're not going to have time to listen to it, but I will link it on Moodle. Make sure you take a look at it. We're going to move on to interpretive criticism. This is the second type of criticism, so where descriptive criticism is kind of a literal describing exactly what's happening in the song. Interpretive is getting down below the surface. And your book says it's an explication of the content of a work of art to help us understand how the artistic form, so basically the parts we perceive or the parts we can see, transforms the subject matter, what the work of art is about, into content, which is that meaning. So all of this helps us find meaning. And explicate just basically means to analyze or to reveal meaning. So interpretive criticism is probably the one that you're most familiar with. This is what you do when you're asked to evaluate or interpret literature or things like that. So in keeping with that, we're going to interpret a poem real quickly. This is going to be a surface interpretation. We could talk for probably an hour about this poem, but we're just going to look at a few things. So after you've read this poem, take a look at the contrast between the first two stanzas, and in addition to the first two stanzas, the first two lines of the third stanza, and then that last line of the third stanza. So you'll notice that the first two stanzas are kind of idyllic, very nature-oriented. You're thinking about it's a lake, nature, kind of peace and quiet sort of thing. But that last line of the third stanza says, "While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's gray." So that line there reveals the whole kind of point or overall meaning of this poem. Basically, this guy wants to go to Innisfree. It's probably a wish or a dream of his, but the reality is that he has to do his straight up 9 to 5, kind of the grind that all of us have to do. So it's just his wish or his daydream to go to Lake Isle of Innisfree. It's not really possible for him. So let's take a look at just a few of the things that get you there besides that third line in the third stanza. Let's take a look at tone. If you read this, you're probably noticing that it's pretty sing-songy. It's got some rhyme in it. And in fact, this has been set to music several times. So that kind of sing-songy tone gives you an idea of wistfulness or yearning, and it's very nostalgic. So this guy is kind of looking back on maybe a better time and a better place and wishing he was there. The imagery also gives that. You get this imagery of peace and quiet, of a slow and simple lifestyle, of a very natural lifestyle, being kind of close to the land and close to nature. A lot of the words that jump out to help you with that are things like a hive for the honeybee, the veils of the morning, so the morning fog, crickets sing. We think about crickets singing at nighttime in the country. And then words like glimmer and glow give you a nice warm feeling and happy feeling. So that kind of tells you that imagery, but it's very in contrast with standing on the roadway or the pavement's gray. We don't think of gray as a very happy color. We also know that this is a more urban image, so all the images that come before are natural, but in that third line, it's man-made, urban, and not as happy. And then finally, there are a lot of symbols in this poem, but the big one is in that last line, the heart's deep core. So basically that's the symbol for this guy's most ardent wish, what he wants most in his life, deep, deep in his heart's core. He wishes for the simple life at the Lake Isle of Innisfree, but unfortunately he can't get it. So, like I said, that's a pretty simple description of the interpretation of this poem. We could talk about it for quite some time, but those are some types of things that you'd be thinking about if you were participating in interpretive criticism. The last type of criticism we need to talk about is evaluative criticism. And according to your book, this is to judge a work's merits according to specific criteria. And your book says those criteria are perfection, insight, and inexhaustibility. I'd like you to please go to page 57 in your textbook. The very last full paragraph explains to you what those three things mean: perfection, insight, and inexhaustibility. Those are some things you'll need to know, so please make note of those from your textbook. But one other thing to think about is that evaluative criticism can be pretty imperfect, and sometimes it can be less than constructive, because who's to say one thing is better than another? For example, your book talks about some banned works of art, and somebody might think it's very profound and just fine, and other people might be offended by it. And that evaluation can become problematic when maybe people in power are the ones that are evaluating it negatively, because then not everybody gets to see it and judge for themselves. So be careful with evaluative criticism. One example of evaluative criticism that kind of has been in the news in the past decade or so is the Harry Potter series. The Harry Potter series, to some, is an excellent coming-of-age story that has this epic feel to it, and it's really, excellent young adult literature. To some people, the witchcraft and imagery of magic is unacceptable and anti-Christian. So in some places it's been banned, in some places it's been lauded, and you never really can tell because the evaluative criticism is always up to the individual, but some individuals take it a step farther and ban it from others. So that's chapter 3 in a nutshell. Again, please make sure you look at your textbook. All in all, hopefully what you took out of this was that you're already a critic, but you have to be a more purposeful critic to get into that higher level critical critiquing of art. And ultimately, all of these things that make you a responsible, purposeful critic of the arts are the same skills that help you be responsible, purposeful thinkers, students, consumers, citizens, and ultimately people. So that's part of why this is so important. Being able to critique the arts means having those skills that make you able to critique all the other things that come through into your life. I will see you next Monday. Have a good week. Talk to you then.